Hello. Today we will discuss the sources and evidences of indigenous arts, and this is the Philippine Indigenous Crafts UM81. And let's just have a brief overview of that. So for today's discussion, we will talk about the three traditions, but we will just concentrate on the indigenous tradition. We will also have a glimpse of the burial jars, weaponry, charms and amulets, body ornamentation, textiles, decorative weaving, ethnic clothing, wood carving, and other influences in pre-colonial area. So we were not really going to the details of this because we will look at them one by one in a separate topic. For now, we'll just gloss over them, and the goal only here is to familiarize yourself so that you will know what to expect or what else can be seen as we go along the this course. Okay, let us start. The sources and influences of the visual arts in the Philippines may be classified according to the three principal cultural traditions found in the country. The first one, the indigenous tradition. This would be during the pre-colonial period, that is before the coming of the Spaniards. And then we have the Spanish tradition covering from 1565 to 1898. So notice that even though uh, Spain conquered us in 15 conquered and colonized by Spain in 1521, the visual art influenced only appeared in 1565 when the Spaniards became more aggressive in making sure that they infiltrate everything of the Filipino life and replace the Spanish way into from the indigenous way or the traditional way before their coming, because they saw the Filipinos or they saw the locals as uh, barbarians. So they were teaching them their own ways. And then we have this tradition continued with the Euro-Americans, 1930s up to the present. Okay, so let us look at them one by one. The indigenous tradition, uh, this period can be seen in the arts of the natives in the long period for colonization. We will see this because of the unearthing of so many things. Now, thank you to archaeology, we were able to see the things, the materials that were used by our ancestors pre-colonial period. And then we also have, they can also be seen in the arts of the non-Hispanized ethnic communities today. So the non-Hispanized, they are those people who were not really, um, the Spaniards were not really able to infiltrate into the way of living of these people. These were the people who run to the boondocks. I like the word boondocks. The Tagalog is bundok. So we have a word that was taken from our word. And so you have the boondocks. Now they run to the boondocks, and the Spaniards did not go after them anymore. So they were able to preserve their their art form, their way, their culture. And then we also have from the southern side of the Philippines. You also have the Muslim cultures, a lot of the Muslims, wherein the Spaniards just cannot get through them because Islam has already been strongly ingrained in their system. And so we have that, the Moros, you have the Igrots, and so on. And then we also have the lowland folk arts, which fuse ethnic and colonial aspects. So these were the people, the arts of the people who were colonized, but who would still get inspired from the ethnic art. And so they would now bring together or fuse, add together. Now the art coming, the inspiration coming from the indigenous people and from their colonizer. Example of that, you have the parole over there and in Pampanga. So those are lowland folks. And then we have the Spanish tradition from 1565 to 1898, seen in the religious paintings and prints academic paintings, landscapes, portraits, letras y figuras, letters and figures, still lifes, and other works done by the unschooled and schooled Filipino artists. So some of them, they were formally schooled. Like for example, you have one Luna over here who has given us the spoliarium, and this is considered as one of the largest, if not the largest, painting here in the Philippines, done in 8 months, and has brought glory to the Philippines when it won the gold medal in an international art competition. And then you have the unschooled as well, those who were not trained in the in the academy, but still were able to bring out their art to the world. And then the letras y figuras, like what we see here, no, the Pasco by Alvaro Jimenez. The letras y figuras, which means the Pasko, which means Christmas, is based on the 19th century style called letras y figuras, or letters and figures. This is an art form wherein the artist creatively forms letters by making the most out of the contours, colors, and shadings of the different human figures, animals, plants, and other objects. So they normally showcase an individual's name, usually the one who asked the painter to do that artwork. Okay, so in this case, what we have here is the, if you step back further, now you will see here you have the P, and then you have the A here, and then the S, and then you have the K, and then the O, and so you will have Pasko. So that's the letras y figuras. And then, going to the Euro-American tradition, 1930s to the present, or the present is a combination of a lot of influences, but basically it's still Euro-American tradition. They came in via the Americanized educational system. You know that one of the major things that the Americans introduced to the Philippines was their brand of education. And so that's how they introduced the art forms to us. And then the media, and which has been indigenized in the painting. We are good at that, getting from other countries, other influences, and then making it our own. So the term here now is indigenizing the painting and sculptures done by Filipino artists. Example of that, you have the Planting Rice by Fernando Amorsolo. You have the style now, and then of course, a very obvious indigenization. You have the LV pattern, and so you have here in the Jeep, and the Jeep is actually also one of the things that we got from the Americans after the Second World War. They left the Philippines but left the jeepneys, and so the Filipinos didn't know what to do with that. They decided, okay, why not just turn this one into a public transportation, and that's what happened. That's the birth now of the jeepneys, making this our own from them. Okay, so those are the three traditions, but this time now let us concentrate on the indigenous tradition, or the ethnic tradition. And there are so many influences of the ethnic tradition, just like what we have now. But we can see this more, again, as I said, thank you to archaeology, who made sure that we will still be able to check on those what would otherwise be some kind of dirt or maybe trash, but those trash, those artifacts that they were able to dig, they gave us clues on how it was during the coming of the Spaniards, especially since when the Spaniards came here, most of the observation that they gave to us were coming from their point of view. The artifacts that were dug will now tell us stories that the materials, the nature itself um, has preserved all throughout those years. So let us look at some of the evidences, some of the artifacts that were unearthed in archaeological excavations. They include, but are not limited to, earthenware, body ornaments and jewelry, and textile fragments. So let us start first with the earthenware or the burial jars. In the case of the burial jars that we have here, the ancient tradition of jar burial was diffused or spread throughout the southern part of the Asian mainland, the Malay archipelago, and the Southeast Asian region. This practice was related to the tradition of grave furniture. The grave furniture is in which the dead were buried along with various articles of everyday use, such as eating utensils and weapons, and in the case of the nobility, in some cases with servants even and domestic animals. So hindi lang yung katawan niya or hindi lang yung buto niya ang nandiyan. Kapag kamayaman ka, pati yung kasama na yung katawan din or yung buto rin ng mga alipin. So one of the most celebrated artifacts that were unearthed is the Manunungkul jar. You have here, this one was found in Tabon Cave, and the at the lid as two rowers in a boat and is related again to the Southeast Asian belief that the dead ride the spirit boats, or this one, the Manunungkul jar, is also called the ship of the dead. So it will carry now the body, or the jar will be carried across a body of water to reach the other world. So that is the usual belief. So you will notice that in some parts of the world they would have the body on the raft and then will be on the river, or maybe the ash would now be scattered on the river because the rivers or the bodies of water are usually seen as the pathway towards the other world. And the burial jar, this one, the Manunggul, is considered as a secondary burial. The secondary burial wherein the corpse will now be if the corpses has now turned into bones, they will get that, they will print that again, and there will be another ceremony. And after that second ceremony, they will now place the bone in that jar. So notice that the two rowers here, the first one, that is a dead body. That is how they would usually position the body of the dead, where you have the arms across the chest. And then we have the second rower over here, or the second person over here is the rower. This would now be the one who will bring the dead body to the afterlife. So that's for the earthenware. And a very interesting uh, artifacts also, we have the weaponry. This weaponry is not just only used for tribal warfare, but also weapon for hunting and food gathering. So we have the different shapes over there. These weapons were produced by means of the Malay forge or lost wax process, wherein clay molds held the molten metal which took shape as it cooled. So pagpapanday. It's not just only making sure that they will be hot enough so they can be formed into, they can be sharpened, but the attachment here in the molds that they are using here is called the Malay forge or the lost wax process. One of the more interesting weaponry that we have is what is called the kris. Here, this is the kris. In the Metal Age, spears were produced as well as bladed weapons, some of them with handles embellished by geometric and curvilinear designs. Ayan. So that also shows us the Naga technique or the Naga design. The weapons of southern Philippines, particularly, we have here the wavy kris, is part of a long Southeast Asian tradition of Malay metalwork. So I'm not really sure what works better, this one or the straight one. So we have here the straight and the wavy one. And then aside from the weaponry, okay, aside from the weaponry, we also have the jewelry. For the jewelry, charms usually used in the as charms and amulets or the anting-anting. The pre-colonial body ornaments and jewelry, which functioned as charms and amulets to drive away spirits, also constitute an important collection of artifacts. Many of these were fashioned in gold from the mines of the Cordilleras in the north and Camarines in southern Luzon. The tradition of silver filigree is also part of our Southeast Asian heritage. So notice that a lot of the things that I have mentioned so far, the influence that we had were coming from the Southeast Asian, our Asian neighbors. Indigenous designs in jewelry began in early times and continued in the Spanish period. The filigree is defined as delicate ornamental work made of intertwined gold and or silver wire or a design that resembles this. So we have, for example, here, I'm sorry, I was not able to transfer this one, but this is the jewelry for the charms and the amulets. This is the filigree. Okay, and this one, you have the bronze amulet. And this would now be some of the anting-antings, the charms that they have. Okay, and then, so this, the bronze amulet is called the dinumug. And this is an example of the silver filigree. Another type of body ornamentation is the tattoo. The practice of tattooing was widely spread over the seafaring communities of Oceania rather, and the South Pacific, including New Zealand, where the chiefs sported elaborate facial and body marks. In our case, we were able to influence them as well as to the tattoo. Uh, some would say that they influenced us, others would say that we influenced them. But what we can see is that the pattern that they have is almost the same as the pattern that our early people also sported. So the ancient art of tattooing was so prevalent that Spanish colonizers did not fail to notice at one point calling the Visayas Islas de los Pintados. No, because they would have tattoos all over their body. By the way, when we talk about the tattoo, you have to understand as well that the tattoo is not just for ornamentation, but it has a message. It has meaning to them. And we can see that in the Boxer Codex, which was drawn in 1590. So this was the impression of the Spaniards when they saw some of the Filipinos, and the way that they drew the Filipinos, it contained drawings of human types from different ethnic groups, and they show men tattooed on the face and body with spiral designs and floral motifs. Ang dami, very intricate. I don't know. For those of you who have the tattoo, especially if you have experienced the one done by Apo Wang Od, yung nail. So it's not like the way that the tattoo is being done now. There, you really have to bear every stab or every point that is being made, and the more intricate it is, of course, the more points you will have to endure. Up to the present, as we said, many old men and women of the Cordilleras bear the tattoo symbols of their group. Next, we have the textiles, decorative weaving techniques. It also goes back to early times and shows its cultural affinity with the rest of Southeast Asia. Again, we will look more into the details of this weaving when we go to the subject of weaving itself. So such the decorative weaving techniques, such as the supplementary weft found in much of Yakan weave, are shared with many countries of the region. And they are also using ikat. It's a decorative dyeing technique. Now, when they dye their textiles. So you have the tinalak weave of the Tibolis here. You have the dagmay weave of the Bagobos. And then we also have the Yakan weave of Basilan. Partnered with the textiles would be the ethnic clothing. In the ethnic clothing, again going back to a very very close tie to our Southeast Asian neighbors. Examples of this, you have the tapis of Pontoc, there. The Padadjong of the Ilonggos, I think this is very familiar to a lot of you who have performed in the Philippine, just the uh, wika ng linggo ng wika. Ayan. So this is what you would usually support. And then the malong of the Maranaos. So iba-iba sila, different ways of looking at doing the clothes, sewing the clothes as well. And then we have a very important one as well, wood carving, very prevalent during the Indigenous period. In the Cordilleras, features this one features stylized human figures such as the male and female bulul and the tatagu, and numerous animal figures of ritual and the hunter, the dog, the pig, and the boar. So bulul is seen as the granary god. So they would usually be, we can see a lot of the Ifugaos having this in their home, making sure that they would have somebody protecting their rice fields. And then you have the hidden god here, the Tatagu. Its subject and style show affinities with the arts of Oceania and Polynesia, as well as New Guinea and Celebes. Okay, so that's for the uh, wood carving. Aside from that, we also have in Mindanao this time, we have a local expression of the larger Southeast Asian Malay wood carving tradition. So here, uh, it's more obvious how the Malay tradition greatly influenced the Philippines, specifically in Mindanao. This is evident especially in the Okir art of the Muslim Maranao and the Tausug of Mindanao and Sulu. Now, what is Okir or Okil? It is the term for rectilinear and curvilinear plant-based designs and folk motifs that can be usually found among the Moro and Lumad peoples of the southern Philippines as well as part of Sabah. So notice here you have the curvilinear there. Okay, so that is the style of the Okir. So you have the Naga here, the Sarimanok. The Naga would be the serpent-like design. And then you have the Sarimanok. We will look into that also. And then the Pakorabong. Okay, so are the major works. Now let us look at some of the other influences. We have a lot, I mentioned already a lot of times, Southeast Asian, the Malay animes, and then mentioned also were the Oceanic Polynesian influence found in the South Pacific. And then we also have the Indian Hindu Buddhist influence, we have the Chinese influence, and the Arabic Islamic influence. Now, just to go back to some more of the Southeast Asian influences, we have the sari manok. This is a kingfisher-like bird. What is the kingfisher? There you have the kingfisher. Now, we have a lot of this because I live inside UP, LB, and we have a lot of this. This was taken in just one of the trees hanging there. Na in one of my walks I took this one. So anyway, so it's usually this one, usually with a fish in its beak or base. Ayan, may isda dyan. It belongs to the region's rich bird imagery derived epics, myths, and legends. In Asian mythologies, birds are symbols of the human spirit and the transcendence of that spirit over matter, and symbols too of the liberation of the individual spirit as it merges with the universal soul. And then we have the Hindu-Buddhist influences. In the Hindu-Buddhist influences, we can see, already mentioned earlier, you have the Naga, the serpent design, ayan, and the serpent, we have this here. And in fact, the word Naga itself came from Sanskrit. And then we have the clay medallion of Avalokitesvara, Padmapani, a lotus-bearing Hindu female deity that have been excavated. Now, we can easily see the influence here because we do not have lotus. Now, lotus would be from the Hindu Buddhist culture. Is because we because it was found here in the Philippines, we can see the influence now. And then we have the Shivaite, golden image in Agusan. We are this is also not one of our gods, or this is not how we perceive God to be. We are more of the nature loving or nature worshiping people. So Shiva, or the Shivaite image here, worships Shiva. Now Shiva is one of the triumvirate gods in the Hindu tradition, and considered as the god of destruction. And then, of course, we cannot discount the Chinese influence. Here, when you talk about the Chinese, the first thing that comes to mind would be their influence in matters pertaining to trade and commerce. And even during the early times, in fact, if I think if there would be a discoverer of the Philippines, the honor should be given to the Chinese or to the Arabs, those early traders. So during the centuries of pre-colonial trade with China, large quantities of porcelain were brought into the country, and these were highly valued, and their shapes and designs soon influenced indigenous pottery. So you have the porcelain over here. And then looking further into the Chinese influence, we have also the xylography. The xylography is the Chinese system of engraving, which was adopted for the first books printed in the country. So there yung pag-uukit na yan, so that is xylography. And then interesting also here we have the shoemakers in Cebu, taken in 1899, very much the traditional Chinese that is usually pictured in kung fu movies. So the Chinese artisans were also in demand in the building of churches and houses, particularly for their supply of building materials such as tiles for roofing and lime for bonding stone. And then furthermore into the Islamic influences, we have in art, the Islamic manifestations were the mosques with their minarets. Ito yung mga minarets nila, the tower-like thing. And then we have the bulb-like domes, looking like garlic. And their calligraphic inscriptions. Uh, the way that they write is already an art in itself from Quran. A Muslim sultanate was first established from Sulu, effectively introducing Islam as a way of life to a large area of the south. And we have a very, very nice mosque here, the Grand Mosque in Cotabato City. Sultan Haji Hassan al-Bolkiah Mosque. So if you are in Cotabato City, you might want to, it's so difficult to miss this one, and you might want to visit it as well. Some more of the Islamic influences. We have an example of three-dimensional Islamic sculpture, which is the burak. This is the burak, the half woman and half horse figure, considered to be uh, the transportation mode of those who will go to heaven. So this is also what Muhammad, as they believed, rode on his way to heaven. And then brass bears were also seen in the ritual vessels. In the rites, you must have this special vessel. You have the candy, and so it's not something that you pop inside your mouth. And you have the gadur as well here. So you have the candy and the gadur, showing the influence of Middle Eastern forms and the motifs. Let me see. The candy is a vessel with a round body, tall neck, mouth, a spout on the shoulder, and a flat base, as opposed to the gadur, which is a Maranao food jar made of brass and has a silver inlay. They are usually used as a ceremonial container for rice and tobacco. And so you have the burak as I mentioned here, usually the transportation mode of the prophets, and then you have the candy, and then you have the gadur. And that's it for the discussion on the sources and evidences. Hopefully, we were able to see the how we are so connected with our neighbors, and how their art were infused in our art, and how we made those art also part of ours. The designs that we have here, we can still also use them, but we can also see the long way by which we have separated ourselves from the early designs and the early art of our indigenous or our ancient people. In fact, I mentioned indigenous and ancient art because ancient we can consider the indigenous art or crafts as coming from the ancient art. You know, ancient art, they do not really think of art as art. In fact, there is no word for art because they look at art the way the indigenous people look at the art as a way of life, as part of their system, and it's not just something that they do to express themselves. Now, whenever you talk about art in the indigenous method or in the indigenous way or the ancient way, it talks of art as uh, what will it be its function in my life. So that's how they would view it. So just to end the discussion that we had, let me end with one given to us, a quote coming from Steve Perry. A concerted effort to preserve our heritage is a vital link to our cultural, educational, aesthetic, inspirational, and economic legacies. All of the things that quite literally make us who we are. So let us not forget it. You know, our expression, our art should always know the roots as well because that will also be part of how we should express ourselves. So that's it for this one. Thank you so much.